My name is Becky Anderson, and I work for Macmillan, and we are delighted to have you guys here today and to have Lonni Pearce with us talking about integrating writer's help into a first-year classroom. The way this session is going to work, Lonnie's going to do her presentation. We will pass the controls over to her shortly. As she's talking, if you have any questions, please type them into the chat field. You will see at the top of your screen in blue, there's a little button that says chat, and then you can send a message to all panelists or to me, to Becky Anderson. And if it's a question, an immediate question, who is this person talking, something like that, we'll answer it immediately. If it's a question for Lonni, we're going to wait until the conclusion of her presentation, and then we will I will read each of those questions out loud for her to answer. So if you have questions about how she's actually using writer's help or anything that comes up in the presentation, you should feel free to ask questions. We're definitely leaving time for questions and answers. I think Lonnie's going to talk for a half hour or so, 35 minutes, somewhere in there. And then we have a ton of time for questions after that. So I think with that, we will pass the power over to Lonni. Thank you very much for coming today, Lonni.
Great, glad to be here.
All right, and feel free to get started.
Okay, terrific. Thanks, Becky. And thanks to all of you who are taking the time out today to be here from wherever you are. So welcome, and thanks also to Becky for organizing. So my goal here today is just to talk about some ways to integrate writer's help into a first-year class. We want our students to become better writers. We want them to learn about writing in our classes, but we also want them to leave our classrooms as more active self-learners so that they continue to develop their writing skill even beyond our classroom, beyond the end of our semesters when they move on to their other classes. So hopefully the strategies that I'm sharing today will help us to help students do just that. As Becky mentioned, feel free to send questions or comments, and we can discuss those at the end. Also, just a couple of quick notes before I get started. When we get into the slides, you'll see some screenshots of Writer's Help integrated into the slides. Those are from Writer's Help version 1.0. Based on the work of Diana Hacker, Stephen Bernhard, and Nancy Summers. So if you've been looking at Writer's Help 2.0 or a different version, the Andrea Lunsford version, things will look a bit different. But the strategies that we're talking about today really will work for, I think, any of the versions of Writer's Help. So let's go ahead and get started. So again, we're talking about 4 different ways to really move writer's help into a first-year classroom in ways that will help students to help themselves. Just to give you a little bit of background about the institutional context from which I'm speaking, I teach at the Program for Writing and Rhetoric at the University of Colorado in Boulder. It's a fairly large research institution. We offer over 100 sections each semester of our first-year courses with a class size of about 19. So we have about 2,000 students in our first-year classes each semester. The student population are mostly traditional first-year students, but we have a very large percentage of out-of-state students. Probably being located in Boulder, you can probably imagine why. Lots of skiers and boarders. So close to 45% of our students are from out of state. So as a consequence, we have a huge range of secondary writing class experiences that our students are coming from. There's really no way to sort of generalize about the kind of high school writing experiences that they've had because they come from so many different places. We also have a growing international student population, so we have several sections that are designated for ESL and ELL students, or they can choose to be in our regular writing sections. Our faculty, the folks who teach our classes, we have 5 tenure track folks who teach and administer in the program, but also around 40 instructors who also teach and administer various parts of the program, about 15 graduate students, and around 25 to 30 lecturers. So again, a lot of diversity in the folks who are in the classroom. Our curriculum, as is probably very similar to the classes that you teach, are based on the WPI outcomes and emphasize analysis, argument, and research within a rhetorical framework. So we have 3 different versions of that course. One version is an extended version for students who want a little more help. It's a 4-credit instead of a 3-credit. We have our main first-year writing course, and then an advanced writing course. And students self-select into those courses based on a system of directed self-placement. So hopefully that's helpful for you in kind of thinking about your particular institutional context to know a little bit about where I'm speaking from. So how did we get into thinking about writer's help? A few years ago, as a faculty, we started talking about these 3 questions, really. First of all, how do students typically look for help with writing? Well, probably the same way they look for help with most other things they do these days, and that is to do online searching. They might also talk to their parents or contact you as a teacher or a friend, but it seems like for the most part, when students are looking for information, they quickly go online. The second question, writing support that students need outside the classroom. We really want to make sure that we are giving students resources that are easily accessible, quickly available to them, that feel comfortable and familiar, that don't have a huge learning curve, and that become something that they can just sort of adopt on their own and start to use independently of whatever it is that we're doing in our classes. And then the last question, how do we teach linguistic conventions in the classroom, really leads us into those 4 methods that we're going to talk about today. It's what we discovered as we were having this conversation, that there are really 4 ways into teaching linguistic conventions, and as well as many other writing issues that seemed like useful ways to use writer's help. So as we were talking, we piloted writer's help for 2 semesters, and then we did decide to adopt it as a requirement for all our first-year sections, which we've been doing for the past year and a half. So we've developed training for our faculty. So essentially what I'm sharing today is kind of a distilled version of what I share with our faculty and with new faculty when they come into our program. All right, so let's get started. So these are the 4 methods that we'll talk about today. And just a quick note, as we talk, it may sound like there's a lot going on, and like if you were actually to sort of move into using these 4 methods, that it would take a lot of time. At the end, we'll talk for a little while about how you might consider getting started. And one of the things that we found through our pilot is that different faculty found different ways into using writer's help through one of these 4 methods. So although we'll talk about all 4, if you are new to writer's help or thinking about using it or have just started using it, don't feel overwhelmed. Think about which of these 4 methods might be your way into using writer's help, and then considering other methods maybe later as time goes by. So let's start with the first idea, and that is to integrate writer's help into your homework activities. And the ways that we have used writer's help in this method is to kind of what you would expect, find stuff in writer's help that's useful, and then to use the tag and assign feature to have students read those sections ahead of class, bring that information into class, and then we do something with it. So early in the semester, the direction of information, and this is kind of the trajectory we'll see as we talk about all of the methods, really is from the teacher directing the student to specific sections, and then the student going to those sections and then responding and doing something with that information. What we'll talk about is how that trajectory shifts a little bit, or can shift, over the course of the semester. So this might be something like a prompt you would offer to your students as a homework prompt, to give them a couple of specific sections that relate to whatever assignment they're working on, and then to come up with some ideas of how they'll apply that information. And one of the things that I would like to just mention or recommend is that whenever possible, it's great to make this a collaborative thing. So if you'll notice, I ask students to post online their ideas so that we can generate kind of a class knowledge base. It becomes a way of students helping each other generate ideas and think about the writing tasks that they're working on. So again, just a quick recommendation that when you have individual students doing tasks, if there are ways that they can collaborate and share the information that they're finding, either through class discussion, through online lists or online discussions, then that is a good thing. So as the semester goes on, as I mentioned, what we want to do, or we want to try to shift the direction of the information from the teacher directing the student to specific information, then to moving that to where the student is directing the teacher and the rest of the class to specific information. So later on in the semester, rather than telling students what sections I'd like for them to read, I will give them a task. For example, they are going to be working on an argument essay. So I'll give them the assignment description and ask them to go to Writer's Help, take some time, browse, use some of the key words from the assignment description, use what we've talked about in class, and then tag 3 or 4 sections that they think they will use while they're writing, and then they can come into class and share those particular tags with the rest of the class. So if you'll notice now, then the students are pointing us to specific sections of Writer's Help rather than me directing them to specific sections. So this is something that happens later in the semester. I've kept a prompt like this very general because one of the great things about using Writer's Help or a resource like Writer's Help is there's so much information that students will often come up with sections and pieces of content that I hadn't even thought of that are very useful. So by keeping it general, I'm encouraging students to really search widely and see what they come up with. And it's actually really fun to see the sections that they bring into class. And it's also very instructive because I get a sense of how their minds are thinking when they are trying to figure out how to get to work on a particular writing task. So that's the first method, is to think about how to use Writer's Help in the homework. Moving on to classroom activities, and this is a great way to get started, particularly if you are helping students to become just familiar with Writer's Help, which again is something that we want to do over the course of the semester so they continue to use the resource after they leave our classes. This method is also probably where you can most easily suit Writer's Help to your particular teaching style. So the kinds of classroom activities that you already do, it's usually pretty easy to integrate Writer's Help into the activities and kind of discussions that you already have in class. So one of the things that's helpful to talk about when we talk about classroom activities is the availability of technology. When you're working in class, obviously it's helpful for some students to have laptops or a tablet where they can access Writer's Help. I found that I don't necessarily need for all students to have Writer's Help. If we're doing small group activities or even workshopping, they can share within their workshop group. And for a whole class workshop, then it's fine if nobody has a laptop that particular day. But if you do plan to use Writer's Help and have students accessing it in class, you might encourage them to bring their laptops and tablets, or have that particular class maybe in a computer lab. So if you're working in class, there are a couple of different ways you can think about using Writer's Help to support what you're teaching. The first way is to just have small group activities where there's a focus. So for example, each small group might be researching a particular writing issue. You give them 5 or 10 minutes to search in Writer's Help, and then they present to the class what they found. And you might either direct them to specific sections, or again, you might keep it more general if you want them to kind of cast the net more broadly. This is also a helpful way into Writer's Help early in the semester so that students are comfortable with the interface. They start to figure out when to use the table of contents or when they might want to use the index. So just having them do some low-stakes activities in class is pretty helpful early in the semester. You might also have them use Writer's Help in more formal peer review activities. So I typically, when students are peer reviewing each other's work, will give them a guided set of questions that's suited to that assignment. I imagine many of us do that. And I will direct them to certain things in Writer's Help that I'd like for them to do specifically in relation to commenting on each other's work. So for example, if we're focusing on introductions, one of my prompts on their peer review might be read the section on introductions in Writer's Help, read each other's introductions, and then talk about strengths and weaknesses. So again, I'm mapping Writer's Help content onto specific things that students are doing and onto their writing. One of the fun things that I found to do with the whole class, if we're doing a whole class workshop, is to use the notes feature. So if you notice the screenshot there, there's a gray box at the top of the Writer's Help content panel in the middle. And that's where I've used the notes feature to actually insert some student writing into Writer's Help so that we can talk about it. So I think this is useful for a couple of reasons. Number one, if you have just a short chunk of student writing that is a good example of an issue that many students are dealing with, you can do this as a whole class workshop and help all of the students at the same time think about this particular writing issue. So if you've used the notes feature, or if you haven't used the notes feature, it's really, really pretty simple. If you look at the gray panel over on the right where your tags and tools are, if you're at the section, the content section in the middle, all you have to do is click on notes, add a top note, and cut and paste the student writing in. This is, you can do this obviously other ways. You could toggle back and forth between windows, so you could have your student writing in one window, Writer's Help in another window. But if you have a short chunk of student writing that you really want to talk about that will help you direct students towards information on a specific issue, this is a great way to do it. It's right there on one screen. Again, you're using the interface, so students are becoming more comfortable with the interface, and the student writing and the Writer's Help information are right there together on the same screen. Also, keep in mind that trajectory that we're talking about. So early in the semester, again, classroom activities, I often direct students to specific pieces of content, specific topics, but later in the semester, you can open it up. Have students find the content that matches the task, and then share that content with each other and with the class. So that's our kind of second method that we want to think about today. The third method, and I will tell you that this is personally where I got started. I started with using Writer's Help, specifically in my comments on student writing. So if you look at the screen, and I apologize, it looks like the screenshot is a little bit over the text there. Early in the semester, I used the Share a Link feature to get students to specific content that will help them in their, within their papers. So just to give you a little bit of background about my writing style, I tend to comment on students' papers using Word. You may use other software, or you may write on printed copies. I think the same principle essentially works. If you know Writer's Help version 1.0, you will know that one of the things to be aware of is that when you're looking at Writer's Help, the URL at the top is not necessarily the URL of the specific content panel. If you use the Share a Link feature, which is also over in your tags and tools on the right, you can send the specific link for that specific piece of content to yourself or to your students. So the way that I've adopted that is when I find a piece of information that a student needs, say for example, it's the confusion between its and its. I go to Writer's Help, I find that section, click on Share a Link, send the link to myself, and then as you can see in the screenshot there, integrated those blue hyperlinks into my comments on student papers. So when a student opens up the file, they can go directly to Writer's Help, find that information, and figure out how to apply that to their writing. A couple of things that we found, that it's easy to start your own library of Writer's Help links. So I now have my own Word file that has my list of Writer's Help links and the different topics that I tend to use most frequently, and I can pop open that file and click, just cut and paste the links directly into student writing and into the comments. Again, if you are commenting on printed copies, you can still do this. You may just want to jot down the section title and direct students to Writer's Help that way. An interesting idea that we've talked about here in the PWR at CU is to come up with a program level Writer's Help library where all of our faculty would just contribute the links that they use most frequently, and we would actually just have a program library that would be accessible to all faculty. It's, of course, along with so many other things that we do, we haven't yet had the time to implement that idea, but I still think that it's something we will do in the future because it would be, again, a really useful way for our faculty just to help each other and to really pool our wisdom so that we can respond to our students more effectively. Okay, so what about in this method, how do we kind of leverage that same trajectory that we've talked about in getting students to move from taking content directly from us to helping them find that content for themselves? So later in the semester, when I comment on student writing, you'll notice in the screenshot there are no more blue hyperlinks. I will still direct students to certain writing issues, obviously, and I may give them some language, but I will just use the phrase Writer's Help Lookup. So as we talk about in class, I tell them that's a phrase that means you as a student need to go to Writer's Help, find the section that will help you revise your writing, and then apply that information to your writing. Again, here's an example of getting students to become more independent, to do a little bit more self-learning. I will say that this method sometimes requires a little more follow-up. So often, once I've returned drafts to students and they've gotten that cue, Writer's Help Lookup, in class during a small group activity or during a workshop time, I will try to check in with students and make sure that they follow up. You know, just ask them, so hey, what did you find for this particular comment? What did you find in Writer's Help that will help you address that particular issue? So this method, I would say, requires a little more follow-up just to make sure that students actually take a look at Writer's Help and are finding the information that you want them to find, because sometimes they do have a hard time finding exactly what they need, and it does take a little bit of follow-up to help them locate that particular piece of information that they really need for that part of their writing. So far, we've looked at ways to integrate Writer's Help into your homework and to have students look at content ahead of time. We've talked about some ideas for integrating Writer's Help into your classroom activities, and also specifically commenting and responding to student writing with Writer's Help to support you in that. Again, my way into Writer's Help was this particular method, because we have a population of students that come from so many different places, and the writing abilities are at such different levels. It seemed most helpful for me to really address individual students' needs by getting them to connect Writer's Help with their specific writing. So the last method that I'd like to talk about, and then we'll talk a little bit about ways to think about maybe how to get started, is to integrate Writer's Help into your assignment descriptions. So early in the semester, again, we want students to be directed to specific pieces of information. You might have Writer's Help hyperlinks in your assignments if you distribute your assignment descriptions online, or you might list specific sections within Writer's Help that are relevant for that assignment on your printed assignment sheets. Either way works really well, or you can do both if you distribute printed copies and online versions. But this is a method that is really helpful if there's information that may not be absolutely essential to an assignment, but is helpful support for a few students or maybe many of your students, because you are giving them additional support beyond what you've said in class, beyond the homework that they've done, beyond the activities. It's really just there when they start to work on a particular assignment. If they see something in that list of hyperlinks that seems useful, or see something in that list of topics that's on the printed copy that seems useful, they can go directly to those sections and find information that might be helpful for that particular assignment. So as the semester goes by, I may not use hyperlinks in my assignment descriptions. Again, actually I go back to something very similar to, well, the same prompt that we talked about when we talked about homework, and that is getting students to look at the task and then to go to Writer's Help independently and do a search, find information, and come into class or to an online discussion and have information that they can share with me and share with their classmates that will help them accomplish that particular assignment. So that's kind of a quick overview of the 4 different methods. Before we open things up for questions, I'd like to just talk a little bit about how do you think about starting? Again, so if you think of doing all 4 of these things at once in your current classes, that is a lot to do, and we're already very busy with all the other things that we're expected to do as we teach. So if you are considering starting to use Writer's Help or expanding the ways that you use Writer's Help, some of the things that you might think about are, well, first off, a couple of recommendations. Again, to help students build the habit of helping themselves, it's helpful over the course of the semester to have regular touch points in class with Writer's Help. So that may be one reason why you start with that second method of using Writer's Help primarily in your in-class activities and in-class discussions and workshops. Something that I read not too long ago mentioned the fact that if you want people to acquire sort of a new habit, give them 5 or 6 touch points, regular touch points over a particular period of time that will help them become familiar with that habit or develop that habit. So you might think of ways to, over the course of the semester, build in 5, 6, even more probably, touch points where students are learning about Writer's Help, seeing Writer's Help, and becoming familiar with how to use it for themselves. But maybe that's not as useful for you. I would say whatever method you're considering, use it regularly, use it consistently, and think about how to shift the responsibility over the semester from you specifically directing students to students directing themselves, and students independently figuring out how to find information in Writer's Help that's important for what they're working on. I think I mentioned earlier that it may depend on your student population. So, for example, if you're working with a student population where there are a lot of students who have very similar issues, again, you might focus more on the in-class use, because then you're addressing those common issues all at once. Students can work on their writing together. You can direct them as a group towards certain pieces of information. But if that's not the case, if you have a broader student population, then you might take the same approach that was useful for me, which is to start by commenting on students writing individually and directing individual students to specific pieces of content within Writer's Help. For example, if you are working in online or hybrid courses, it seems like one way that might be effective is integrating Writer's Help into your assignment descriptions and then following up through homework, since in online classes students are working more independently and may need additional support beyond what you can provide through, say, your podcasts or your other kinds of online discussions or online resources. So building that information into the assignment descriptions is a way to help students who are maybe learning in a kind of a more independent learning situation to find particular pieces of information that they need. So let me just bring us back to our goal. The big picture is really to help students become familiar enough with Writer's Help or with a resource like Writer's Help so that they use it independently beyond our class period or beyond our classes. And so there is a need to show and I think integrate Writer's Help into your class activities to some extent, just so that students get that helping hand as they start to become familiar with it. But really, ultimately, we want our students, I think, to learn about writing while they're in our classes and to leave our classes as better writers, but also we want them to leave our classes as more independent learners, so they continue to work on their writing, to actively seek out information that they need that will help them develop when they're writing in other classes, when they're writing in other kinds of social or civic situations. So hopefully what we've talked about here today will be just a way into thinking about using Writer's Help in a first-year classroom, using one or more or some combination of these 4 methods. So with that, I will close and ask Becky to share any particular comments or questions. We can talk about the specific features by going over to Writer's Help and looking at those features, or I'll just respond to whatever comments and questions that you have. And again, thank you for taking the time out to be here. Also, I will post my email address, so if you have any follow-up questions after the webinar is over, please feel free to email. So with that, I'll turn the controls back over to Becky.
All right. So again, if anybody has additional questions, you can either type them into the chat field or into Q&A. I've seen some people using Q&A. So we do have a couple questions here. What has student feedback been on Writer's Help? Do they like this? Is it helping?
Yes, we've had good feedback from students. I think of one comment that I got from a student a couple of semesters ago, And she was a little indignant because she wondered why her high school writing teacher had never introduced her to Writer's Help. And I had to tell her, well, that's because it didn't exist when you were in high school. But we've had generally very good feedback from students if, and then here's the caveat, that if we've used it consistently in class to the point where they feel comfortable with it. If you only show it to them, say once, and then say, hey, this resource is there for you, no, they don't actually have a great response because it hasn't really been integrated into the way they think about learning about writing, and it hasn't really been integrated into the work of the class. But generally, students do go on to use it. I mean, our usage reports show that students are using it beyond our classes, which makes us very happy.
And how did you get all of these instructors to agree to do this and get trained? And it sounds like you don't necessarily have sort of the same amount of usage from everybody.
Right, and that is it's an evolutionary process. So one of the things that we did, as I think I mentioned, we piloted Writer's Help with a fairly small, well, actually not that small, a group of probably 10 to 12 faculty over the course of 2 semesters. And in our pilot, we made sure we had all types of faculty represented, so instructors, lecturers, graduate students, tenure track. So we were hearing from all the different kinds of faculty who teach in our program. We had public conversations across the program. We did faculty surveys as part of the pilot. We did student surveys as part of the pilot, and then really asked people to speak candidly about ways that they would or would not use Writer's Help. So I would say, as you would expect in a large writing program, and I will also mention that we don't have a mandated assignment sequence. There's common learning goals that we all work from and a sort of menu of assignments that instructors typically use, but there is quite a bit of diversity in how people teach the course. So consequently, there's quite a bit of diversity in how people use Writer's Help. We didn't talk much about ESL students, but one of the things that our instructors who teach our ESL sections have found that I didn't talk about as part of the presentation is that they will use the exercises with ESL students as an extra credit option. So faculty use it differently. I would say I still view it as something we are evolving towards. So we continue to offer regular training over the course of the semester. We'll focus on one particular type of assignment, or we'll focus on one particular feature so that faculty are regularly getting a chance to kind of expand their repertoire and try something new.
And the question is, have you seen increased student success since adopting Writer's Help, and does Writer's Help allow for collection of student success data at the program level?
Could you repeat that again?
Have you seen increased student success since adopting it, and can you sort of see data, student data at the program level?
We don't have data at the program level. That's actually another pilot that we're working on right now is piloting, a good assessment method. We've done some things in the past with reading particular essays, and we're looking towards portfolios. But my sense is that when we get our portfolio system in place, which hopefully will be fairly soon, that will be one of the questions that we ask as we look at the portfolios, is the effectiveness of Writer's Help. So I'm sorry that I can't answer with any particularly hard data. It's anecdotal at this point.
I think in the writing area that is, it's a challenge to figure out how to accurately assess improvements and things anyhow.
Right, right.
Do you guys have a lab space, or do all the students pretty much have computers?
Well, again, it's a large campus, so there are a lot of computer labs that are available that teachers can sign up, and so usually it's not a problem to find a lab for a particular class period. for the most part, across our sections, not all students will have laptops, and we are very aware of that, and we want to be very careful about not assuming that everybody comes in with a laptop or a tablet or some other device. So we have talked with faculty about gauging that early on in the semester, and if it seems like a significant number of students don't have laptops, then go ahead and sign up for those computer labs for certain class periods. We also have a program, you know, a laptop cart that instructors, faculty can use. I would say in many of our sections, though, it's probably 60 to 70% of our students do have laptops. And so that's one of the reasons that I tend to rely on group activities where if you have even one student in the group who has a laptop, they can successfully complete that activity.
Okay. I will give people another moment to see if anybody else has any additional questions. But in the meantime, Lonni, thank you very much for doing this. I know that it's a bit odd to make your presentation with no feedback from the audience. So thank you very much for agreeing to do this in this sort of unusual manner. And if anybody has questions, you can see this is a good way to contact Lonni, and I think you've probably all gotten an email from me. I'm Becky Anderson at Macmillan. You can also ask me or your local sales rep.
So, and thanks again to everyone. Appreciate you being here. And again, please email me with any follow-up questions. And happy teaching.
All right. Thank you very much, ma'am. We'll talk to you later.
Okay. Take care.
Okay. Bye.
Bye.